Hello, everybody. Welcome to History Tea Time Chat Live with me, Philippa Lacey-Brule. I hope you have had a great week. Today, I want to talk to you about the Old Operating Theatre, which is somewhere I managed to visit the other week when I was down in Southwark, and I think you'll find quite fascinating. I did. And as I was walking around the area, I also saw a legend linked to it. So there's loads of links that I think you're going to find interesting, or at least, yeah, interesting. That'll do. That'll be a word. So how are you all? Thank you for joining. I can see Brian and Melissa and Marianne and Deborah all joined on YouTube. I'm also streaming live on Facebook and Instagram. Welcome to you if you're joining me live. Thank you if you're on the catch up, and also hello if you're listening on the podcast, which you can also do. I know some people prefer these sorts of programs on the go. So, like I say, today I'm going to talk about the Old Operating Theatre. Here's a little. I'll tell you what. Let me give you a little sneak peek of the place I'm talking about. Good afternoon, Mark. Welcome. So this is the place I'm going to be talking about. And you might have seen photographs of it. It's the oldest operating theatre to survive in Europe. So I think there are other operating theatres around that maybe have been updated, but this one lay forgotten about for over 100 years. So we'll get into the story about that. But before I do, I just want to say thank you for joining me. Obviously, you can support me on YouTube, Facebook, or Instagram with all the hearts and stars and whatever. But what I love for you to do is come over to my Patreon, because there's loads of extra stuff in there. We are soon, in 18 days' time, I asked Siri to do the math for me. We are having our next book club meeting. It's about the Palace. Book which you can see just on the back here by Gareth Russell. That's our next book. We're meeting on the 10th of March. It's a Zoom meeting, so it doesn't matter where you are in the world, as long as the time suits you. Of course, you can come and to that meeting. And then the book after that is so that's 18 days to read a book. Perfectly welcome to come along if you haven't read the book, of course. But if you would like to maybe join ready in time for the next book, it's going to be Nicola Tallis's Uncrowned Queen, The Fateful Life of Margaret Beaufort, the Tudor matriarch. So there's a bit of a heads up. So I'd like to give a short shout out to Maureen, Diane, Elaine, Kiernan and Gary, who have all become patrons in the last week. So yes, Jen has noticed I've actually done my nails. Yes. Beverly's got 2/3 of the way through the Palace. Well, I can't wait to get into book club. Any of Gareth's books are an absolute joy to cover in book club. His writing is it's really unique in that unique's probably not, that's maybe a bit unfair on other writers, but the amount of information that Gareth Russell can pack into a page and yet it's really easy to read. So really looking forward to getting into that. But so today, the Old Operating Theatre. Okay, so I will whack a picture back up of it as promised. Oh, actually, I wonder if I've got one of the entrance first. Well, anyway, so here the old. So when you go to London, you can visit this Old Operating Theatre, and it's it's in an old church, and we'll get on to that as part of the story. I don't know if it was a restaurant stroke club stroke something. I went in the daytime and the music was so loud. It was an interesting setup in this very historic place, and there was this music just like bang bang downstairs. It was quite bizarre. And you go up this staircase. I'm trying to see if I've got a picture of the staircase for you. It's very interesting, but it's so old, and it's a wooden spiral staircase that they've got a traffic light system. So at the bottom, So the ticket office is at the top. I think it's 56 steps or so, and you get to the top, and that's where the little shop and ticket desk is. But the bottom there is either a green tick or a red cross to tell you whether or not you can go up the stairs or not. Such is the slimness of them that it basically is one way. So yes, so almost it's not difficult to find because you can see the sign outside. But if you do go, just as a top tip, don't be put off by the loud music happening in the door to the right of the staircase that you want to go up, or by the fact that it might have a red cross lit up, because that's just to let people come down, and then they switch it to green and you can go up. So there's some top tips to not put you off going and finding it. And when you get up to it, you, like I say, you go into the ticket office, but you come first to what is called the herb garret. And so well, so I'm showing it on the screen. It's basically, the garret is an attic space, and this was purposely designed to the attic space for storage was purposely designed into the design of the building, but it became the herb garret. So it became where the apothecaries would dry and store their herbs and their lotions and potions, because it was away from the main hospital. It's sort of drier, cooler, presumably, although I'm not quite sure in the summer. And so you've got this, and then you've got the picture that I flashed up before, the old operating theatre, which is so we're going to get into the story of all this because it's absolutely fascinating, I think. So we're going to go, well, let's first of all tell you that it wasn't until 1956. There's a organist and antiquarian called Raymond Russell, he actually collected instruments. So I'm not sure how he got. Well, presumably he knew about the organ in the. He was an organist and it must have known the church, and asked for permission to access the attic. And so for some reason, and he went up, and apparently it's up at the time the only access was up this sort of rickety ladder, I suppose, and he found the herb garret, and there was some bricks in a wall that had fallen away, and through this once bricked up entrance or opening, he found this operating theatre. And this is the only remaining part, so the operating theatre and the herb garret, of the old St Thomas's Hospital, which is the precursor to St Thomas's Hospital in Lambeth now, which it moved to that site in 1862. I think I remember the late Queen's late husband, Prince Philip, was being treated there. I might be wrong, but it's opposite. It's the opposite side of the River Thames to the Houses of Parliament. That is where St Thomas is now. Old St Thomas's. This is what remains of it. So the herb garret. So let me show you some other pictures of it. Now, obviously, it's being set up now as a museum, so I'm not sure that there would have been a dispensary counter like there is here, but that dates back to 1703, the operating theatre to 1822. And it's been a publicly accessible museum since 1962. So it's got it's almost got a follow-on history of its own, hasn't it? But it's been open to the public since 1962. And because the operating theatre had been abandoned, so bricked up, abandoned, forgotten about, because it's in the top of the church, it didn't get demolished because the church didn't get demolished with the rest of the of Old St Thomas's Hospital. And so and this is how come this operating theatre survives from 1822 and is now um, the oldest surviving in Europe. Um, so the church itself, which I'm sorry I don't have a picture of the outside of the church, was built in 1698. Well, between 1698 and 1702, um, by a master mason of Sir Christopher Wren's. Thomas Cartwright, his name was. Christopher Wren actually donated £500 towards the building of the church, which abutted the hospital, which had been there before. There was a church, but it was dilapidated, so they decided that they were going to replace it. So I've told you about the garret, what it was used for. Let me show you some of the displays because I love this. So everywhere in the museum, in the herb garret, it's got these displays of dried herbs and seeds and all these other things. There's actually, I'll get onto some of the instruments as well in a minute, and what they were used for. It's fascinating and delightful. The surgical instruments, not so much, not so much. But and I'll come on to it more in a bit, but the medical practices of the time obviously were the most advanced that there was. And the techniques for surgery, for everything were different. But let me tell you more about it. So the operating theatre was no, sorry, I'm going to bring up that picture once again, and you can see there are double doors. For those of you listening on the podcast, there is basically a theatre. This is actually where the name operating theatre, because it was a theatre. You've got standing room here for I can't remember how many people they think they could have got in here. It's something like 150. I might come to that in my notes in a minute and have to correct myself. Students, other doctors, people who would come and observe the operations in order to be able to go away and do it somewhere themselves. There's double doors behind the actual operating table, and those would have led into the Dorcas ward. The Dorcas ward was the women's ward, and it was on the same level as the herb garret, hence why it was in the top of this garret, part of this garret space. And the men's operating theatre would also have been on the top floor somewhere in the building, in the hospital, excuse me. And the reason being, if you see to the top, there is a huge window, a huge skylight, and that is purely because of the light, to get the best amount of light into the room. It is the women's theatre. There was a separate men's theatre. And like I say, this theatre led directly off the women's ward through those double doors originally. There isn't. It wouldn't now. That's gone. And must have been quite harrowing if you were in the ward, knowing that through those doors is the operating theatre. So what is quite harrowing, you have to think. So this operating theatre dates to 1822. Anaesthetics were introduced in 1846. So this operating theatre predates anaesthetics. It's surgery without pain relief. And that required a different style of surgery. So there were a few things. They would only operate for certain sort of the most serious cases. So surgery was a last resort, and it had to be quick. So these were the signs of a good surgeon, really. Now you'd be maybe surprised. I don't know if I should maybe let you guess in the comments, and then I'll tell you. But what the mortality rate was. So surgery here, no painkillers, no anesthesia. The mortality rate, what do you reckon that could be as a percentage? Just throw me out some guesses and I will tell you in a moment. Fascinatingly, in 1846, when they start to bring in anaesthetics, the mortality rate actually increases. So one of the biggest killers, of course, from any surgery, including today, is risk of infection. And once they brought in anaesthetics, surgeons could take longer, they could do more, deeper surgery, and more complex surgery. And actually mortality rates increased. So the mortality rate before 1846 at this hospital, I think, 30%. So you actually had a 70% chance of survival, which is way higher than I thought it would be. So mortality rate was way lower than I thought it would be at 30%. And like I say, in 1846, they bring in anaesthetics. So they're doing more complex surgery, deeper into the body. And Manda has just mentioned it in the comments. Hand washing and tool sterilisation, not common until 1875. Yes, so they're doing more complex surgery. They're taking longer over it. And yet they don't understand infection control still. Surgeons would wash their hands after the operation because they're dirty after the operation. They would wear aprons, but these aprons were to protect their own clothes. The more blood on your apron, the more experience you have. So the apron wasn't worn for any sort of patient protection. They just didn't understand how these things worked. And there's a cabinet actually in the corridor just outside this theatre, which has a number of different cases for surgical equipment. And they were working through what materials the surgical equipment were best to use to make them out of, and what materials, fabrics or whatever were best to use in the cases for their surgical instruments. Because they were finding some were better than others. And so I don't know, your surgeon might have a lovely velvet lined case with all his surgical instruments in, but that would keep hold of the germs or whatever. And so they did try different things, and until obviously they had a good understanding of it. So and like I say, yes, so I've come across the bit in my notes. So you'll see this. So if anyone who's listening on the podcast, you've basically got a tiered standing system, a little bit like I don't know if anyone in the US, I don't know if you have this in stadiums. So in football stadiums here, in lower league stadiums, when you've got standing stands, you've got them tiered, and you have sort of rails that people can lean over or whatever, lean on. And it's in a circular style. So exactly like an old theatre. That is what this is. Up to 150 people, like I say, would observe the operations. Must have been harrowing for the patient. I just can't imagine for the patient how they're feeling. I get nervous now going down for a general anaesthetic like I had to do when I had my finger amputated, and I just the idea that you're going to go into surgery without that, and everyone's going to have a little squizzy at what's happening as well. Just unbelievable. So yeah, they didn't have painkillers. They I suppose the three biggest risks in surgery before anaesthetics were blood loss, shock, and infection. So they were the biggest risks. Um, and like I said, that got complicated a little bit after the advent of anaesthetics. Perhaps shock is different. Shock is does come from blood loss. So um, anyway, but infection became more of a risk as well than it had done beforehand. So the quicker the surgeon was, that was a sign of, that was what they were trying to do. They were trying to do surgery as quick as possible before anaesthetics, so that the obviously the horror of it was as short lived as possible. But let's go back to the hospital's roots, if you would indulge me, because there was a hospital in this area. So we're in the Southwark area of London. So we are just south of the city of London on the other side of the Thames River. And there was a hospital here, definitely from the 12th century, because there was an Augustinian priory, the Priory of St Mary Overy, and Overy means over the river. And because this was a crossing point of the River Thames, and there was so like I say, there was this Augustinian priory here. The Roman roots, sorry, the roots of Southwark actually go back to Roman times. It was a place to cross the river, so this was that important strategically, and that's the root of, I think that's supposed to be the root of the name of the area. So that's like Southern Works. But now there possibly was an older Christian nunnery going back to the 7th century. We'll come back to a bit of a thing about that later. Because there was a minster already noted to be here in the Domesday Book. Now, of course, priories, monasteries would have many times infirmaries, especially somewhere like here, actually open to I was gonna say open to the public, but you get what I mean. And so there would have been one here. In 1173, the Augustinian Priory Hospital, was dedicated to St Thomas, in honour of St Thomas Becket, who'd actually visited the priory shortly before he was martyred at Canterbury in 1170. So 3 years later, they actually dedicated the hospital to St Thomas. That's why it's got the name St Thomas Becket. Now, of course, so that St Thomas's Hospital was a direct predecessor of this one that we're looking at for the old operating theatre, because there was one almost continuously. Of course, we had the dissolution of the monasteries, and the priory here was dissolved in 1539, and the hospital and the whole building closed, and dissolved. Now that the church, the predecessor to this church where the operating theatre is in the attic of, was saved by the congregation. It was actually still remained under Henry VIII's ownership and was leased out to the congregation. But 12 years later, under the reign of Henry VIII's son, Edward VI, so in 1551, he what do you call it? He established a medical school here. So he gave out a charter. I can't think of the right word for gave out a charter. I mean, Edward VI chartered many schools. I went to an old Edward VI school. He had a short reign, but for some reason, educational institutions were a big part of it. And the medical school that was set up by Edward VI by charter at St Thomas's Hospital established it as a medical school. However, of course, it couldn't be dedicated to St Thomas Becket anymore. Thomas Becket, despite Henry VIII remaining ostensibly Catholic till the end of his life, there were certain elements to the Catholic worship and religion that he wanted removing, and one of them was any reverence to the story or the man or the relics of Thomas Becket, because of course he stood up to royal authority. So he was not a favoured saint of Henry VIII. So the hospital under Edward, of course, Edward VI isn't into saints at all, none of them, but it was dedicated to St Thomas the Apostle, and so hence it could still be named St Thomas's. And the hospital that there was needed rebuilding in the late 17th century, and it was new, it was larger, and it was made up of, I can't remember, it was 2 or 3 courtyards, so really quite extensive. But in 1862, the hospital had to move to its current, it's still there in Lambeth, its current position in Lambeth, because the land was subject to a compulsory purchase order because of the new underground rail links that were going there. But so the church and its attic remained, but the rest of Old St Thomas's Hospital was taken down, and the attic, well, the operating theatre bricked up, the attic sealed, and it remained that way from 1862 until 1956, when it was rediscovered, which is really quite amazing, isn't it? Now, when I was walking around Southwark after my visit to the old operating theatre and its links all the way back to the 12th century, I walked around, and when you're in Southwark, you can go and see the recreation of the Golden Hind. To be honest, I wasn't that interested in the recreation of the Golden Hind because you couldn't go onto it. It's closed at the moment. But next to it, there was this slab, I don't know, in the wall with this legend of Mary Overy. So, like I said, the original priory was St Mary Overy. Overy meaning over the river. But let me read to you what that legend, encapsulated in this plaque, says. So it says on there, legend suggests that before the construction of London Bridge in the 10th century, a ferry existed at this crossing point. Ferrying passengers across the River Thames was a lucrative trade. John Overs, who with his watermen and apprentices kept the Traverse ferry over the Thames, meaning obviously the ferry that goes over the Thames back and forth, made such a good living that he was able to acquire a considerable estate on the south bank of the river. John Overs makes you wonder whether Overs is from his trade. Oh, anyway, we'll carry on. John Overs, a notorious miser, despite making all this money, devised a plan to save money. He would feign death, believing that his family and servants would fast out of respect and thereby save a day's provisions. However, when he carried out the plan, the servants were so overjoyed at his death that they began to feast and make merry. In a rage, the old man leapt out of bed, to the horror of his servants. So he was playing dead. One of whom picked up a broken oar and, thinking to kill the devil at the first blow, actually struck out his brains. Presumably the insinuation there is that they did believe he was dead, and then the devil had brought him back to life, and so they so he decided to knock the devil out. The ferryman's distressed daughter Mary sent for her lover, who in haste to claim the inheritance fell from his horse and broke his neck. So now Mary has lost her father and her lover. Mary was so overcome by these misfortunes that she devoted her inheritance to founding a convent into which she retreated. This became the Priory of St Mary Overy, Mary having been made a saint on account of her charity. During the Reformation, the Church of St Mary Overy was renamed St Saviour's Church, And in 1905, it became Southwark Cathedral and the Collegiate Church of Saviour, and St Mary Overy. Fascinating legends, quite a few holes in it. the I now I could have my topography incorrect, but if this is a crossing point, an ancient crossing point that the Romans utilized, I think, and this is what I could be wrong, that meant it was fordable. In other words, it was traversable by foot at low tide. Um, Therefore, that doesn't say to me that it's a great place for the ferry to be. I would have thought you would want to be a little downriver. How would that work? Yes, is that right? So that you've got water, but there you go. Um, and yes, so there's one thing, and then so he plays dead and thinks that his family are going and his servants are going to fast, so he's only going to save 1 day of provisions. So that doesn't sound worth it to me. What's he going to keep doing that? Like every time he wants to save some money, we could just not feed them. I don't know, for a day. And then it's the lady's lover, Mary's lover, who thinks he's going to claim the inheritance. Doesn't say her husband. Anyway, when I looked up what is the legend of St Mary Overy, there is no St Mary Overy. It is St Mary, the Virgin, as far as I can work out. There's no separate St Mary. So that doesn't seem to stand up. So unless I've missed that in the records, but either way, it was quite fascinating to walk around Southwark after seeing the old operating theatre, walking past Southwark Cathedral, walking past the Palace of Winchester, which, if any of you joined us on History After Dark for the Bishops of Winchester, you will know a bit of the history of that and of the area. And then to come across this plaque with some sort of explanation of the legend. Of course, it seems to indicate there that there was a priory previous or longer than the 17th century, which apparently in Tudor times it was still being talked about how this priory had been around since much earlier than was first recorded. But the first record of it is supposed to be in the Domesday Book, or at least something being here in the Domesday Book, a Minster. So there you go. So I thought that was quite fascinating. The old operating theatre is well worth a visit if you are going to that area of London. And like I say, you can sort of have a walk around and mix in what you're looking at and all the links between the things, between the places, and of course Southwark Cathedral being the actual church of the priory, where also just as an aside, but the wedding of James I of Scotland to Joan Beaufort took place, because the Bishop of Winchester at that time, 1423, was Cardinal Beaufort, the bride's uncle. And so the wedding somehow took place there. So there you go. There you go. So yeah, so there's a hostel right back from the 12th century, and it still stands today at the moment. Well, now it's in Lambeth. Lucy says, when she'd have been canonised, was it pre or post needing the Pope's permission? I don't think it's ever not needed the Pope's permission, has it? Unless I've misunderstood. Couldn't find. I mean, please feel free to, if anyone looks it up and finds out something different, I'm more than happy for you to let me know. So Melissa says, according to Time Team, Lambeth across to Thorney Island was where the Romans forded. The Thames Centre is not deep there. So there was definitely over to Thorney Island. There was a passing place, that's the origin of why we have Westminster Abbey there, why we have Westminster Palace there, um, because there was thought to be some kind of spiritual as well, sort of feeling about the place, I suppose. And that's where that comes from. But there was certainly a so where the Tower of London is, the reason the Tower of London is there is because that was the highest upriver, so the furthest upriver that was navigable by ship. And so the Romans set up a camp there because you couldn't go further upriver by ship. Therefore, anything that was being brought into the area by ship had to go through them so they could tax it, keep an eye on it, whatever they wanted to do. So that certainly means there was some that was at least much shallower water after that. So I suppose a ferry could be, it's not a ferry, is it? It's a little boat probably. So yeah, so that could be, maybe I'm thinking it needs to be a bigger boat than than it actually needs to be. Maybe it's more flat bottomed, like a canal boat, with the river being much slower and more sluggish and shallow then. So yeah. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I love going to somewhere different. Obviously, it's still got the links back to the ancient history, if you like that. But um, I love the fact that it was hidden for over 100 years, and so left as it was. Really, really quite fascinating. So, um, oh, Lucy says rules changed at the end of the 11th century. Because saints were popping up everywhere. You could be canonized for lots of charitable giving or donations before the rule changed. Yes, they decided they better make some rules around this. It's a little bit too easy. So yeah, because doesn't there has to be so many uh like miracles, doesn't there, and things like that. But there was a little change with the uh 40 martyrs, um for that. They sort of did that one on mass. Yeah, so, yes, Amanda, new hair. I went a bit darker. So, yeah, I went to the gym though, so it's a little bit greasy. Sorry about that, everybody. Right, if you want, I am back later on, 8:15 tonight with the History After Dark girl. So on the History After Dark channel, it could go awry tonight because we are doing a few games before getting back into our History Heroes series next week. So if you're around at 8:15, that's UK time tonight, wherever time that is where you are, then please do join us. Otherwise, you can join me again here next week when I will be oh, thank you so much, people, about my hair. That's so kind. When I don't know actually what I'll be talking about next week. I shall let you know. I shall let you know. Might do some Romans next week. What do you fancy? Let me know. Okay, everybody. I will let you get on with your day. And hopefully I'll see you tonight, or I will see you next week. So thank you so much, everybody. All right. Take care. Bye bye.